The morning he almost didn't stop was the morning everything changed, the morning the cost of kindness finally revealed itself in a way that would haunt him forever. Rain soaked through his thin jacket, his phone buzzed with delivery alerts he was already late for, and his gas gauge blinked angrily as if warning him he couldn't afford even one more detour. Yet there she was again, standing behind the fogged glass of her front door, waiting with the same fragile hope in her eyes, unaware that today would take something from him he could never fully get back. Before this story goes any further, if you believe that kindness still matters in a world that feels increasingly cold, if you believe in second chances and quiet sacrifices that go unnoticed, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. These stories survive because people like you believe they should be told. Ethan Morales had never imagined his life would shrink to routes, time slots, and unread notifications. At 28, he drove a dented white delivery van that smelled of cardboard and stale coffee, his days measured by packages scanned and doors knocked on. He used to dream bigger once. He used to believe that hard work always led somewhere better. But after his father's medical bills swallowed their savings and his mother passed not long after, dreams became luxuries he couldn't afford. What mattered now was rent, fuel, and keeping the lights on in his small apartment where silence pressed against him every night. The elderly woman lived at the far edge of his route, in a house that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Paint peeled in tired strips, the mailbox leaned as if it were exhausted from standing, and the garden was nothing but weeds and memories. The first time Ethan delivered there, he almost marked it as undeliverable. No car in the driveway, no sign of life. Then the door opened slowly, and she appeared, small and shaking, wrapped in a cardigan that looked too thin for the weather. Her name was Margaret. She smiled at him with the kind of gratitude that felt too heavy for something as simple as a package. At first, it was nothing more than professional courtesy. He waited an extra minute while she signed. He made sure the box was placed inside instead of on the step. But Margaret began to linger, asking about the weather, apologizing for moving slowly, thanking him again and again as if he were doing something extraordinary. Ethan didn't realize how starved she was for human presence, and he didn't realize how easily kindness could turn into routine. Soon, every day he passed her house, even when he had no delivery there, she would be waiting. Sometimes it was with a wave through the window, sometimes with a trembling hand raised as he drove by. One day, she asked if he could help carry groceries inside since the delivery service left them at the door. Another day, she needed help changing a light bulb. Each small request took time he didn't have, minutes that pushed his schedule tighter and tighter. But something in her eyes made it impossible to say no. It wasn't need alone, it was loneliness so deep it felt like a quiet cry echoing through empty rooms. Margaret had outlived everyone who once filled that house. Her husband had died years earlier, her son had moved away and stopped calling, and her friends were either gone or too frail to visit. The days blurred together for her, measured only by the sound of the mail slot and the hope that someone might knock. Ethan became the anchor in her week, the one predictable human presence who didn't rush her, who didn't look at her like a burden. And without realizing it, he began rearranging his life around her needs. The cost started small. A few late deliveries meant warnings from his supervisor. Extra fuel burned from detours he wasn't reimbursed for. Lunch breaks skipped so he could stay on schedule. He told himself it was temporary, that she would need less help eventually. But kindness has a way of growing roots, and soon Margaret depended on him for more than packages. She asked him to check her mail, to look at a leaking faucet, to sit for a moment and listen while she talked about her past. Ethan listened because no one else would. At night, exhaustion pressed into his bones. His bank balance shrank while his responsibilities grew. He stopped seeing friends because he was always tired. He stopped answering calls because he had nothing good to say. And still, every morning, he drove his route knowing he would stop at her house, knowing it would cost him time he couldn't afford, knowing he would do it anyway. Then came the day his supervisor called him into the office. Too many late scans. Too many deviations from the route. Company policy didn't care about elderly women waiting behind fogged glass. Ethan was given a final warning. One more incident, and he'd be replaced. Jobs like his were easy to fill. Desperation sat heavy in his chest as he nodded and promised improvement, already knowing he was lying. The following week, Margaret didn't answer the door right away. When she finally did, her face was pale, her hands shaking more than usual. She looked smaller somehow, as if the house were slowly swallowing her. She told him she hadn't been feeling well, that the nights felt colder lately. Ethan wanted to stay longer, wanted to make sure she was okay, but his phone buzzed again, and the ticking clock in his head screamed louder. He left with a knot in his stomach, the kind that warned of something unfinished. That night, rain returned, heavy and relentless. Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of the way Margaret's smile had faltered, thinking of how alone she was. In the early hours of the morning, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. A neighbor had found Margaret collapsed on her kitchen floor. She had been there for hours before anyone noticed. The hospital said she was stable but weak, confused, and asking for him. Ethan sat in the parking lot of the hospital before his shift, hands gripping the steering wheel, knowing what the right thing was and what it would cost. He went inside anyway. Margaret's eyes lit up when she saw him, relief washing over her tired face. She reached for his hand with surprising strength, as if afraid he might disappear. He stayed longer than he should have, long enough to know she would need help when she was discharged, long enough to miss half his route. By the end of that day, Ethan was fired. The loss hit harder than he expected. Without the job, everything unraveled quickly. Bills piled up. Notices arrived. The safety net he didn't have finally vanished. He blamed himself in quiet moments, wondered if kindness was a luxury only the stable could afford. Yet even as fear tightened around his future, he kept visiting Margaret. He helped her set up medication reminders, cleaned her kitchen, listened as she cried about being a burden. He never told her what it had cost him. Weeks passed. Ethan searched for work relentlessly, rejection emails filling his inbox. Pride gave way to survival. He sold his van. He skipped meals. Through it all, Margaret watched him with growing concern, noticing the weight he lost, the tiredness that clung to him like a shadow. One afternoon, she asked him to sit, her voice steadier than he'd ever heard it. She told him about her past, about sacrifices made quietly, about the son who stopped calling and the fear of dying unseen. Days later, a letter arrived at Ethan's apartment. Inside was a check and a note written in shaky handwriting. Margaret had contacted a local community organization, telling them about the delivery driver who became her lifeline. Her story spread. Neighbors who had barely noticed her before began to check in. The organization offered Ethan a position coordinating volunteer deliveries and welfare checks for seniors, a job created because someone finally saw the need he had been filling alone. The relief was overwhelming, but it came with a weight of its own. He realized how close he had come to losing everything, how thin the line was between compassion and self-destruction. Margaret apologized when she learned the truth, tears streaming down her face, but Ethan understood something then that changed him forever. Kindness had cost him security, comfort, and certainty, but it had also given his life meaning when he needed it most. As Margaret grew stronger, Ethan helped her reconnect with people who had faded from her life. The house felt less empty. Laughter returned in small, tentative moments. And Ethan learned to balance caring for others with caring for himself, a lesson learned the hard way. Just before this story ends, take a moment to comment below. Write the word kindness if you believe small acts can change lives, even when they come at a cost. Near the end of his first month in his new job, Ethan stood outside Margaret's house again, but this time he wasn't alone. Volunteers moved in and out, neighbors waved, and the house no longer felt forgotten. Margaret watched from the window, smiling the same way she always had, but now it wasn't out of loneliness. It was gratitude shared, not borrowed. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the unseen sacrifices people make every day, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder, and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement keeps stories like this alive, and somewhere, someone who feels forgotten might be waiting for the hope you help spread.